My name is Claire Bennett. I am 29 years old now, but the part of my life I am about to tell you began 11 years ago, 3 days before my 18th birthday. That was when my parents canceled the small celebration I had spent months planning because my older sister said watching me have one special evening would make her feel worse about herself. I packed 2 duffel bags, took the coffee tin containing the only money I could reach, and called the one adult who had always treated my work as if it mattered. I left home that night. What happened almost 1 year later, during my grandmother's 80th birthday party in the middle of a flower field I had planted with my own hands, is still the event my family avoids naming directly. My sister stood in front of 31 relatives, stared at everything I had built from the wreckage they gave me, and revealed the truth they had spent a year hiding. By sunset, our family had split into pieces that never fit together again. My mother still believes I caused that fracture. I do not. I simply stopped being the person responsible for holding everyone else together. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Stories, where the women expected to remain silent finally get to tell the whole truth. If you have ever been labeled the strong one because your family found your pain inconvenient, this story may feel familiar. Stay with me. Because the birthday they took from me ended 1 year later, in a field where nobody could speak over me. To understand why canceling that birthday changed everything, you first need to understand how our home worked. The Bennett household operated according to one unwritten rule. Whoever created the loudest emergency received all available attention. Money, time, reassurance, both parents in the room, everything flowed toward the person displaying the most distress. My sister, Vanessa, was 3 years older than I was, and she had mastered that system before either of us was old enough to recognize it. I learned the pattern when I was 7. My second-grade recital happened on the same evening. Vanessa complained of a stomach ache. The pain disappeared later that night, but neither of my parents heard me sing. On the drive home, my mother told me, "Your sister needed us. I'm sure you did wonderfully." She said it as though my independence were a compliment instead of the reason I had been left alone. When I was 12, I saved birthday money for a pair of white sneakers. The week Vanessa decided her shoes pinched, mine became family shoes. Whenever a teacher praised me, my mother diluted the achievement before it reached the dinner table. A good grade became something expected. A ribbon became no reason to make a fuss. My successes had to be kept quiet, because Vanessa might compare herself to me, and comparison might upset her. I want to be accurate about my childhood. My parents did not hit me. I had food, clothing, a bedroom, and transportation to school. From the outside, I looked cared for. Inside our house, however, being fine was not a description of how I felt. It was the role I had been assigned. Vanessa was allowed to need everything, while I was expected to need nothing. I started performing that role at 7 and became so convincing that eventually everyone forgot it was a performance. My father occasionally showed signs that he understood what was happening. After one of Vanessa's crises had swallowed another family evening, he would catch my eye from across the room with a guilty expression. But recognition without action does not protect anyone. He watched the weather gathering and never stepped outside to bring me in. The summer I turned 15, he found me weeding behind my paternal grandmother Eleanor's house. Without any warning, he said, "Your 18th birthday is yours, kiddo. Whatever you want, we'll do it. I promise." I held on to those words for 3 years. That was my mistake. I treated a promise from a passive man as though it had roots. By the time I was approaching 18, Vanessa was 21 and had already enrolled in and abandoned 2 college programs. Each departure followed the same sequence: a late-night call, tears, an explanation about why the environment had failed her, and my mother mobilizing the entire family. Nobody used the word quit. Vanessa had been insufficiently supported. Her professors had not understood sensitive people. Her roommates had damaged her confidence. Every collapse was renamed until it sounded like something noble she had survived, and every newly defined crisis came with a bill my parents rushed to pay. It took me years to understand that they had helped manufacture the fragility they claimed merely to accommodate. Vanessa had been taught from infancy that needing rescue was her identity. I had been taught that not needing rescue was mine. Neither role was healthy, but only one of us was punished for trying to leave it. The clearest example happened at my county 4-H banquet when I was 16. I had earned a ribbon for a raised bed growing system I designed. It was the first thing I had ever been publicly recognized for, and I was shocked when my parents actually attended. Then Vanessa called from a parking lot, crying about her boyfriend. Dinner ended before the awards ceremony. I rode home with the ribbon in my lap while my mother comforted Vanessa over the phone. In the kitchen, Vanessa noticed the ribbon and stared at me as if I had deliberately wounded her. "Tonight was horrible for me," she said. "And you're standing there with a prize. It's supposed to be about me right now." She did not sound embarrassed or irrational. She sounded like someone reminding me of an established household rule. My mother made her tea. My father looked at the counter. Nobody asked to see what I had won. I pinned the ribbon to the inside of my closet door, where anything that belonged only to me had learned to live. What saved me was the greenhouse. At 14, I started working weekends at Whitaker Greenhouse on the edge of town. Its owner, Nora Whitaker, was 63, narrow as a fence rail, and incapable of offering praise she did not mean. I hauled flats, scrubbed pots, unloaded soil, and learned to recognize plants before their labels appeared. Nora paid me in wages, impatient instructions, and practical advice. That was more honest care than I received from most adults. By 17, I could manage her seed room without supervision. Every paycheck went into a savings account at First Hartwell Bank. By September, I had deposited $9,412, 3 years of Saturdays, early mornings, and dirt ground into my fingerprints. There was one problem. Because I had opened the account at 14, the bank required an adult joint owner, and my mother's name was attached to mine. When I was 17, I asked whether I could open an individual account. The teller explained that I would need a parent to co-sign until I turned 18. My mother smiled and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." She repeated the same answer in June and again in August. I noticed the delays. Some part of me understood that the gate was being kept open for a reason, so I began cashing small amounts from my checks, $20 here, 40 there, and hiding the bills in an empty coffee tin behind my winter boots. By September, the tin held $1,300. I told myself I was being paranoid. Mothers were not supposed to be people you protected your earnings from. Looking back, I was not paranoid. I was simply late to accept what I already knew. The birthday I planned was modest. I wanted dinner in Grandma Eleanor's backyard, string lights in the maple tree, 15 relatives in folding chairs, and a chocolate sheet cake with cream filling from Hartwell Bakery. My name would be written across it in yellow icing. Nora had been invited and had responded as though attendance were a personal inconvenience, which meant she intended to come. That was the whole dream. One table, one evening, and for once, everyone's attention allowed to rest on me without being redirected. Turning 18 also represented a doorway. I had been accepted into the state agricultural program for the spring semester. Beyond it, still blurry but real, was the future I wanted: a cut flower farm bearing my own name. Grandma Eleanor had helped give that future its shape. Behind her house on Maple Street, she grew a dark crimson dahlia her family had preserved since the year my father, Daniel, was born. The petals were so deep red they seemed to absorb the afternoon light. That August, she walked beside me through the row, tapped one enormous bloom, and said, "Flowers don't apologize for the space they occupy. You noticed that, Claire?" I did. Her sentence felt like a door left open. 3 weeks before my birthday, Vanessa announced that she had been accepted into a wellness and design program in Columbus. It was exclusive, she said, and required an immediate deposit or her place would be offered to someone whose family believed in her. The kitchen became unusually quiet. I had spent my childhood learning that particular silence. In our house, quiet often meant money was about to change direction. Vanessa lasted 11 days in Columbus, 4 days before my birthday. She returned at 1 in the morning. I heard the front door, and then the unmistakable pitch of her crying, the kind that caused everyone else's plans to be rearranged. By breakfast, the entire house had shifted around her. My mother moved between rooms, making calls in a low, urgent voice. My father studied his coffee. Vanessa occupied the center of the couch, wrapped in the good quilt, explaining how Columbus had mistreated her to anyone who came near. I made toast and said nothing, because silence was my assigned contribution. That evening, I overheard my mother speaking to Aunt Rebecca in the hallway. She was using the careful tone she adopted whenever she was preparing a family story for public release. I heard her say, "We have to do what's best for everyone right now." Then came the sentence actually intended for me, although she never used my name. She has her whole life for birthday parties. In my room, 15 invitations sat on my desk. I had lettered them by hand and drawn a small dahlia on every envelope, but we had never mailed them. Something in me had known not to make the event official. I turned the invitations face down and tried to believe the arithmetic might still work. A girl turned 18 only once. Surely that mattered more than an older sister feeling homesick. I should have known better than to expect our rules to change merely because the calendar did. The next morning, my mother knocked on my bedroom door carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. She wore the gentle expression she used when taking something away while expecting gratitude for the manner in which she did it. She sat on the edge of my bed and said, "Sweetheart, about Tuesday. My 18th birthday had already been reduced to a weekday. Your father and I have been talking. With everything Vanessa is going through, a party would feel like rubbing salt into the wound. Seeing you celebrate while her life is falling apart could break her." I asked what they intended to do. "Postpone it," she said brightly. "We'll have something small later, when she's stronger. Just family." In the Bennett house, later was the place where my things went to disappear. For the first time, I asked the question beneath all the others. "When is my turn scheduled, Mom?" "I'd like to see the calendar." Her expression tightened before rearranging itself into concern. "Claire, don't be dramatic. You have always been fine on your own." There it was, the family constitution spoken clearly. My competence was not something they admired. It was a resource they felt entitled to use. My father appeared in the doorway behind her. I looked directly at him and remembered the promise he had made when I was 15. "Your 18th birthday is yours." He remembered it too. I could see that in his face. He placed one hand on the frame and opened his mouth. Then Vanessa called from downstairs, her voice wet and urgent, and he left without saying anything. A 3-year promise collapsed in less than 30 seconds. On her way out, my mother squeezed my knee and said, "You'll understand when you have a sensitive child." I sat still after they left, listening to the house organize itself around my sister. I did not shout or beg. Anyone who has spent years being the strong one understands why. You develop too much practice at swallowing your first reaction. That evening, Hartwell Bakery called. The employee said she was confirming the changes to Order 41. I told her I had not requested any changes, so she read them aloud. The cake remained chocolate with cream filling, but the pickup had been moved to Saturday. The inscription had also changed. Instead of my name, it would say, "Welcome home, Vanessa." 4 days after my birthday passed without celebration, my parents planned to host an encouragement dinner for my sister. The guest list, I later learned, overlapped almost perfectly with mine. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs, same cake. My party had not been postponed. It had been dismantled and reused for someone else. I thanked the bakery employee because none of it was her fault, ended the call and stood in my room while something inside me became quiet. People like to imagine that leaving home happens during a screaming match. My decision did not feel like fire. It felt like the first hard frost, clear air, no wind, and suddenly the growing season was finished. I pulled 2 duffel bags from the closet. I packed work clothes, boots, my 4-H ribbon, and the 15 unsent invitations. Then I retrieved the coffee tin and counted the money. I called Nora Whitaker. She listened for less than a minute before saying, "There's a loft above the seed room. The bed is narrow. The roof leaks near the east wall, and it costs $40 a month. You'll earn your wages before sunrise. Come or don't." My birthday was still 3 days away, but I did not wait for it. I carried both bags downstairs that night. My mother sat at the kitchen island drinking tea. She looked at the luggage and chose annoyance before concern. "For heaven's sake, Claire, stop being theatrical. Where do you think you're going?" I told her I had work in the morning, which was true. Vanessa watched from the couch with the quilt under her chin. For half a second, Something passed over her face that resembled envy not of my life, but of the fact that I was walking toward a door. My father followed me onto the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand. It contained $60 in small bills, the kind of money someone had collected slowly from his pockets. "Call your grandmother on Sundays," he said. "She'll worry." He did not ask me to stay. The absence of those words was louder than anything he could have said. I walked 2 miles to Whitaker Greenhouse beneath a dark September sky. When I unlocked the seed room, the warm smell of soil met me. The loft was exactly as Nora had described it, drafty, cramped, and mine for $40 a month. Lying on that narrow bed, I understood something I had been approaching for years. Being fine was the rent I had paid to live in my parents' house. That night, I stopped paying. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake. Nora placed one candle in it and seemed irritated by her own kindness. The following morning, I went to First Hartwell Bank to open an individual account and transfer my savings. The teller pulled up the joint account, studied the screen, and her professional smile faltered. The balance was $912. 3 weeks earlier, someone had withdrawn $8,500, almost exactly when Vanessa's urgent Columbus deposit had been due. Every delay made sense. "After your birthday, sweetheart. One thing at a time." My mother had not forgotten to help me open a separate account. She had been keeping access available until she finished using it. The bank records were clear. Because my mother was a joint owner, she had authority to withdraw the funds. The bank could not reverse the transaction merely because every deposited paycheck had been mine. Whatever moral language I used, the institution viewed it as an authorized withdrawal. 3 years of Saturdays had financed a program my sister abandoned in 11 days. I called my mother from the parking lot. She did not deny it. "Family money goes where the family needs it," she said. Vanessa's future was at stake. "You're young, healthy, and good at working. You can earn it back." Then she softened her voice as though offering consolation. "This is what families do." I returned to the bank, withdrew the remaining $912, and closed the account. My hands stayed steady until I reached Nora's truck. By Sunday, my mother had distributed her version of events. According to the official Bennett story, I had thrown a tantrum over a birthday party, abandoned my emotionally fragile sister, and stormed out to punish my parents. Aunt Rebecca left a voicemail telling me how disappointed she was. "Your mother is heartbroken," she said. "All this over a party, Claire? Really?" I did not call to argue. That was not because I lacked an answer. My mother had spent decades becoming the family narrator. Challenging her before the audience she had already prepared would have been like entering a game where she controlled the field, the officials, and the scoreboard. I decided my answer would need to become visible in a form nobody could interrupt. The first Sunday in October, a mud-brown sedan rolled into the greenhouse lot. Grandma Eleanor climbed out with a cane in one hand and a shoebox under the other arm. She was 79, and she inspected the seed room as though checking whether it deserved me. Inside the box, packed in wood shavings, were tubers from her crimson dahlia row on Maple Street. They were rough, knotted, and completely unimpressive to look at, but that family strain had survived for decades. She set the box on the potting bench and said, "You know what these are." It was not a question. "Plant them somewhere people will have to look at them." She patted my cheek and left without demanding an explanation. I held myself together until her taillights vanished. Being betrayed had not made me cry. Being trusted did. That fall and winter, my life narrowed into a schedule precise enough to measure time by. I worked at the greenhouse from 5:30 in the morning until 2, hauling soil, watering flats, and learning the seed room. Then I worked the dinner shift at Millie's Diner until 10, serving meatloaf and coffee to customers who tipped in quarters and unsolicited advice. At night, I read Nora's battered, growing books until the words blurred: succession planting, soil preparation, cold tolerance, stem counts per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out. Nora said crossing out bad plans was a large part of farming. I contacted the state agricultural program and deferred my enrollment for 1 year. I said the reason was financial, which was true, But the shoebox of tubers had also changed the shape of what I wanted. Across town, my $8,500 had bought Vanessa 11 days in Columbus and months inside her old bedroom. Grandma Eleanor gave me short Sunday reports. Your sister is resting. Your mother is managing. Your father is mowing a lawn that stopped growing weeks ago. Thanksgiving approached, and my mother had never allowed a holiday to pass without using it to enforce family order. She called the Monday before Thanksgiving with warmth already prepared in her voice. We want you home, sweetheart. This silliness has continued long enough, and we're ready to put the outburst behind us. I asked what putting it behind us required. With my mother, forgiveness usually came with terms. She explained that I would apologize to Vanessa in front of the family for making her setback about me. I would move back into my old room so my parents could keep an eye on me. Since I was so determined to work, I would contribute money to the household. Finally, I would abandon what she called my little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself. While she spoke, I looked through the loft window at 2 unused acres behind the greenhouse. Frost silvered the dead grass. I asked, "What happens if I say no?" Her voice cooled. "We worry about Vanessa because she is delicate. You have always been fine. Honestly, you're the one child we never had to worry about." Once again, my ability to survive their neglect was being presented as permission to continue it. I thanked her for the invitation and said I had to work Thanksgiving morning. Silence occupied the line before she replied, "Then don't bother coming for Christmas either." She hung up first. She always hung up first. I kept the phone against my ear for several seconds, listening to the empty connection. I would not hear my mother's voice again for almost 10 months. By then, the ground between us would look entirely different. On Christmas Eve, the greenhouse was closed, and the loft was quiet enough for me to hear the propane heater struggling. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. It took 4 attempts. The final version said only, "Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm safe. I'm working." I held the envelope and realized I was not writing to the woman who actually lived at my parents' address. I was writing to a mother I had invented, one who might read the card at the kitchen sink, soften, and drive over with cocoa. That woman had never existed. I placed the card in my drawer beside the 15 invitations. Around 8, headlights crossed the greenhouse windows. Grandma Eleanor arrived carrying molasses cookies and offered no explanation of what she had told my parents. We ate beside the seedling mats while she studied my notebook with the seriousness of a loan officer. Nora came in later with a package wrapped in butcher paper. Inside was a spool of heavy striped grosgrain ribbon. "For your first market table," she said, daring me to become emotional. I respected the warning. After both women left, I placed the ribbon on the windowsill. It looked like what it was, a wager. 2 older women had decided to bet on an 18-year-old with $912, a coffee tin, and a box of ugly tubers. In January, Nora raised the stakes. She walked me into the frozen field behind the greenhouses, wearing heavy boots and an old barn coat. The property faced south, and a water line already ran to an abandoned sheep trough. "I don't provide charity," she said before I could misunderstand. 3 seasons. $900 per season, with the first paid up front. You buy your own seeds, supply your own labor, and make your own mistakes. We put it in writing, and both sign it so neither of us can become sentimental. 2 acres for $900. That amount represented almost everything left from the closed account. Most of the cash in my coffee tin was already assigned to seeds, netting, tarps, and a used walk-behind seeder with one wheel that refused to travel straight. I calculated the risk 3 times. The numbers advised me not to do it. Something beneath the numbers said that if I waited for safety, I might spend my entire life waiting. I signed the lease at Nora's kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres, $900, and Grandma Eleanor's shoebox became the foundation of my inheritance. During the same week, the state agricultural program mailed a letter asking me to confirm my deferred place. I allowed the deadline to pass intentionally. That decision frightened me more than leaving home. When I left my parents' house, I knew where I was walking. Now I was stepping beyond the edge of every plan I had made. 18, no college, no family support, and no backup plan on land I did not own. But farming does not reward someone who keeps one foot outside the field. In February, when the ground began to soften, I nested Grandma Eleanor's tubers in trays of damp shavings. The first green shoots appeared on a morning when any reasonable observer would have called my plan reckless. Spring punished my confidence quickly. I started ranunculus and sweet peas early. Near the end of April, I planted them outside because the 10-day forecast looked favorable and I wanted flowers ready for Mother's Day. Then a late frost descended from Canada under a clear, windless sky. At dawn, I walked past rows containing nearly $400 worth of seedlings and found them collapsed into wet brown tissue. I had known the risk. Nora had warned me. The books had warned me. I gambled because I wanted to gain 2 weeks on the season, and hope had made the odds look kinder than they were. I gave myself 1 hour to feel devastated. I sat on an overturned bucket at the end of the dead row, then opened my notebook and recorded the date, the overnight temperature, what I had planted, and what I would do differently. Self-pity could not be turned into fertilizer, but accurate records could prevent me from paying the same price twice. Nora came out at 7, examined the damage, and said, "Frost is tuition, not a verdict." Then we replanted. I shifted toward hardier flowers, zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, and snapdragons protected under low tunnels. I guarded the dahlias in their trays because they were more than inventory. They were the only inheritance anyone had deliberately placed in my hands. By late May, the field had changed from stakes and measurements into straight green rows. Nora looked across them and grunted, which was the closest she came to throwing a parade. By the first Saturday in June, I faced a problem I had neglected to include in my notebook. I had buckets full of conditioned flowers and nowhere to sell them. The Hartwell Farmers Market rented 8 feet of Saturday space for $15. I reserved a spot between a beekeeper and a woman who sold goat milk soap. I borrowed a card table, tied Nora's striped ribbon around it, and used a chalkboard I had lettered after midnight. I wrapped 30 bouquets in craft paper zinnias bright as colored glass, cosmos, snapdragons, and blue bachelor's buttons, and prepared myself to bring 29 of them home. My first customer was a retired teacher. She purchased 2 bouquets and said nobody had sold fresh local flowers at the market for years. By 10:30, I was reaching beneath the table for extra buckets. At noon, I had nothing left. The cigar box held $340, most of it in $5 bills, and my face ached because I was not accustomed to smiling for that long. $340 was not wealth. It was less than I made during a week of double shifts. But every dollar had grown from land I rented under a contract carrying my own signature. Money produced that way felt different in my hands. News traveled quickly through Hartwell. 2 women from my mother's church recognized me at the stall and became deeply interested in smelling the sweet peas. Before the market closed, my phone displayed a number I had not seen since Thanksgiving. My mother's text contained 3 words. "A market stall. Congratulations. If you grew up with someone like her, you understand how much condescension can fit inside a period." I read it twice, placed the phone beneath the cash in the cigar box, and sold the last bouquets. I did not answer. The field continued answering for me. In July, a bride named Megan stopped at the stall and became emotional over the snapdragons. She asked whether I designed wedding flowers. With the confidence available only to someone who has no idea what the work involves, I said yes. Her late August wedding required a bridal bouquet, 5 jars for each table, and flowers for an arch. The contract was worth $850. I spent 2 weeks studying floral construction and 1 sleepless night arranging stems in every usable container Nora owned. I transported everything in a makeshift cooler, assembled from an old chest freezer box and bags of ice. Late August was when Grandma Eleanor's crimson dahlias opened. The blooms were broad, heavy, and velvet red. I built Megan's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, 3 women asked the caterer who had provided the flowers. She pointed at me and said, "The Dahlia girl." The name followed me home. Megan's mother booked an anniversary party before the reception ended. 2 bridesmaids requested business cards I did not yet have. So I wrote my number on scraps of craft paper with a florist's crayon. Nora laughed during the entire drive back to the greenhouse. By Labor Day, the market stall had become something that needed a name. My best friend, Tessa Lane, had started visiting on Saturdays for gossip and eventually stayed for wages. She sanded an old fence board, painted Bennett blooms across it in buttermilk white letters, and attached it to the stall before asking my permission. Seeing my surname displayed in public made me feel exposed. That reaction told me how thoroughly I had been trained to disappear. By September, the operation resembled a real business. 25 subscription customers collected wrapped bouquets every Friday. Strong market Saturdays brought in as much as $600. Photographs from Megan's wedding circulated among engaged women throughout the county. I paid Nora for the second season early and in cash. She accepted the envelope, looked toward the field, and said my trellis rows were crooked. Translated from Nora, that meant she was proud. Even then, I worked behind the stall whenever possible. Tessa greeted customers while I kept my hat low and my hands occupied. Some survival habits become part of the building's structure. Being seen still felt like entering a room where I expected someone to ask me to leave. Grandma Eleanor continued bringing Sunday reports. Vanessa had quit an online course in June and withdrawn further. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which Grandma said was itself a form of mention. People around town were beginning to question the story they had been told. A girl who supposedly fled home in a tantrum rarely reappears 1 year later with a flower field, a waiting list, and a hand-painted business sign. The Tuesday after Labor Day, the county newspaper called. Laura Kendall wrote its farm and table column. Someone at the market had given her my number, probably the goat soap seller, who treated my life like an ongoing series. Laura wanted to profile a young grower cultivating an heirloom dahlia. I immediately declined. Refusing attention was still my first reflex. I had spent my life passing the microphone to someone else before anybody could accuse me of wanting it. That evening, I told Nora about the call, expecting her to agree that publicity was unnecessary. She set down her coffee harder than usual. "Other people have spent a year telling your story at every dinner table in this county," she said. "You gave them control of it because hiding felt polite. That reporter is offering the pen back. Take it." I called Laura the next morning. She arrived Thursday with a photographer and spent 2 hours walking through the rows. She asked why I chose flowers, why the heirloom dahlias mattered, what the frost had taught me, and what the sign meant. They were ordinary interview questions, but nobody in my family had ever shown that much interest in work I cared about. When the photographer searched for a background, I made a decision that felt almost as difficult as leaving home. I did not hide behind an armful of flowers or ask Tessa to stand beside me. I stood alone in the center of the crimson row, wearing my work apron with dirt across my hands, and looked directly into the camera. The story appeared the following Thursday on the front of the features section. Its headline read, "The 18-year-old grower behind Bennett blooms." The photograph showed me standing among the dark red dahlias, with the field stretching behind me. Laura wrote about my greenhouse job, the 2-acre lease, the frost, my first wedding, and the tubers Grandma Eleanor had preserved. She did not mention my parents. Their absence from the article communicated more than an accusation would have. By noon, my mother had read it. By dinner, nearly everyone who had heard her version of my departure had read it too. The town completed the arithmetic quickly. Women I had never met subscribed to weekly bouquets and included notes saying they were proud of me. The same church members who once avoided asking questions at my market stall now said, "Your grandmother must be delighted." My mother's account tantrum, birthday party, abandonment began collapsing under the weight of a photograph. A lie has trouble surviving. Once visible evidence enters the room. My mother called Friday morning without saying hello. "You put our family business in the newspaper." I pointed out that the article had not mentioned my family at all. "Exactly," she said, her voice shaking. "Now everyone asks Vanessa what she is doing. It happens at church and at the pharmacy. Do you understand what that comparison does to her? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what her life is like." I looked across the 2 acres outside the seed room window and answered, "You're right, Mom. I don't." Then, for the first time in my life, I ended the call before she could. Vanessa said nothing. No text, no message passed through Grandma Eleanor, no dramatic call. From a household where every feeling had once been broadcast at maximum volume, her silence should have warned me that pressure was accumulating somewhere. The next call came from Grandma Eleanor. She would turn 80 at the end of September. Aunt Rebecca wanted to hold the party in the church hall, while my mother preferred her house, where she could control the arrangements. Grandma rejected both. "I've spent 80 years sitting in those rooms," she said. "I want my birthday in your field, in the middle of something honest. I have already told everyone, so nobody can change it quietly." I lowered myself onto a bucket. She was proposing that more than 30 Bennett relatives, including the parents and sister I had not seen in a year, stand in the center of everything I had built from what they took away. "Mom won't come," I said. "She will," Grandma replied. "If she skips my 80th birthday after that newspaper article, she'll have to explain herself publicly. Your mother would rather chew glass." Grandma Eleanor wanted the truth in a place where nobody could cover it with a better tablecloth. I almost refused. For an hour after the call, I walked the rows and considered what it would mean to let them enter my field. The canceled party, the cake bearing Vanessa's name, the empty bank account, and the year of silence were all planted beneath those flowers. If you had been in my position, would you have allowed them to come? I still do not think there is one correct answer. Mine was yes, but not because I had forgiven what happened. I said yes because I no longer wanted fear, deciding who could stand near the life I had created. 1 week before the party, my mother called. She began with logistics as though our last conversation had never happened. How many chairs would we need? Would there be shade? Should Aunt Rebecca bring lemon bars? Then she introduced what she called one small favor. Someday, when people ask about the farm, it would mean a great deal if you presented it as a family project. If you think about it honestly, that's what it is. You learned your work ethic somewhere. I laughed once before I could stop myself. She continued. Dr. Monroe thinks it would be healing for Vanessa to have a role. Events and parties would be perfect. She has an eye for those things. Nothing formal is necessary yet. If the subject comes up Sunday, you could simply mention that Vanessa handles events for Bennett Blooms. She needs a win, Claire. You have so many. The request was the old family system scaled to match my harvest. First my birthday, then my savings, and now the business I had built through frost, double shifts, and sleepless nights. My mother wanted to reissue it as a family achievement and install Vanessa inside the story without requiring her to perform any work. "No, Mom," I said. "The farm is not an apology, and it is not a treatment plan. You are all welcome Sunday as Grandma's guests. I genuinely hope you come. But Vanessa does not work for Bennett Blooms." The silence lasted 1 second too long. Then my mother said, "Fine," in a light voice. I believed I had closed the door on the plan. I had only closed the entrance I could see. The party took place on the final Sunday of September, nearly 1 year after I carried 2 duffel bags out of my parents' house. On Saturday, Tessa and Nora helped position long tables along the center aisle between the dahlia rows. I strung lights through the fence posts and into the young maple near the gate. They were the same kind of lights I had once imagined hanging in Grandma Eleanor's backyard for my 18th birthday. I recognized the symmetry and hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of crimson dahlias and placed them in zinc buckets along the tables. The field had reached its late September peak, the last brilliant flush before frost. That afternoon, my father's truck came up the lane. He was alone and carrying 40 folding chairs borrowed from the church hall. We had not stood face to face in a year. He climbed out, studied the rows, and finally said, "The ground drains well here." In my father's limited language, that was admiration. We arranged chairs together mostly in silence. Twice, he straightened and turned toward me with words forming, but each time he folded them away. At the gate, he managed, "Your grandmother is proud of you." Then he drove back toward the home where my mother was probably preparing both her clothing and her version of events. Tessa found me watching his taillights. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "No," I said. "Set out the coffee urn anyway." The next afternoon, 31 members of my family entered my field. Every invited person came, including my mother, my father, and eventually my sister. They arrived in a line of practical sedans. I watched the field register on their faces at the gate. Aunts stopped speaking halfway through sentences. Cousins lifted their phones. Uncle Peter removed his cap. Golden late afternoon light crossed the rows, and 200 crimson dahlias burned down the center tables. The scale of it contradicted everything they had been told about my supposed childish rebellion. Grandma Eleanor arrived holding Aunt Rebecca's arm and conducted a slow inspection of the center aisle. Then she installed herself at the head table where she could supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped from the car wearing a navy church dress. I will give her this. She never allowed herself to look surprised. Instead, she moved through the tables like a hostess, straightening a jar and rotating a bucket. I heard her tell Aunt Louise, "We always knew Claire had a gift. She gets that from my side. I grew things before the girls were born." In less than an hour, she repaved a year of accusation with the phrase, "We always knew." I did not challenge her. The field did not require me to explain who had planted it. Vanessa arrived 40 minutes late wearing a dress too formal for folding chairs. Her hair and makeup looked like armor. She hugged Grandma Eleanor for the photographs, accepted lemonade she never tasted, and wandered alone around the perimeter. She examined the field as if auditing a life that should somehow have belonged to her. At the gate, she stopped in front of the old fence board where Tessa had painted Bennett blooms. She remained there much longer than anyone normally studies a sign. Aunt Rebecca appeared beside me holding a plate of lemon bars. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was the first question she had directed toward me in a year that was not disguised as an accusation. "Ask me again after sunset," I said. Shortly before the toasts, I went to cut a few additional stems for the cake table. I found my mother alone at the far end of the crimson row, where the party noise faded beneath the bees. She had not heard me approach. 2 fingers rested against one wide bloom, touching it with unexpected tenderness. Her expression had gone somewhere I had never been invited. "We had flowers like these behind the house on Delancey Street," she said, almost to herself. "When I was 19, I started an entire flat from seed, zinnias and asters. I kept notes in a little book. I remained quiet, so I would not frighten the memory away." Then she said, "Your grandmother Margaret became ill. It lasted 2 years, and I was the one who handled everything. Uncle Dean couldn't tolerate hospitals, so I went before work and after. When she died, he received the truck because everyone said he had suffered so much. My seedlings dried on the windowsill. Nobody watered them. Everyone was too busy explaining how strong Dean would need to be. For a few seconds, I saw the girl my mother had been, 19, keeping a notebook, assigned responsibility, while someone else received sympathy. She had been processed by the same family machine decades before she fed Vanessa and me into it. My throat tightened. I almost said, "I understand." It was the closest we had ever come to meeting as 2 people rather than mother and daughter. Then she became aware of me. Her shoulders straightened, and the vulnerable expression disappeared. "That's life, Claire," she said briskly. "The strong ones carry things. That's what love is." She returned to the tables. I stayed among the dahlias and listened to the bees. Her history explained something, but it excused nothing. My mother had once been taught that love meant disappearing beneath other people's needs. Instead of rejecting that lesson, she had passed it to me and called the injury strength. A spoon rang against a glass. Grandma Eleanor stood without assistance, which she wanted everyone to notice, and lifted her lemonade. "In 80 years," she began, "I have celebrated birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and, during one memorable year, a hospital room. This is the first birthday I have had in the middle of something completely honest." She gestured toward the dark red flowers. "My mother grew this dahlia. I planted it the year Daniel was born and kept it alive every season after that. Last fall, I gave the tubers to my granddaughter because a flower like this needs hands that still show up after frost. I recognize those hands when I see them." Her chin trembled, but her voice remained steady. "The flower never had a proper name. Today I am giving it one in front of witnesses, so it will remain. Eleanor's Crimson, grown by Claire Bennett on Claire Bennett's farm. This field is the most honest thing our family has produced in 30 years." The applause was immediate and genuine. 31 faces turned toward me. For the first time, I stood inside other people's attention, without searching for an exit. Then my mother rose, lifted her glass, and caught the applause before it could settle. "And we have one more piece of wonderful news," she announced. "You have all seen Claire in the newspaper. Bennett Blooms is becoming a true family business. Vanessa, sweetheart, stand up. She will be managing events and parties here at the farm. Both of our girls working together, we are so proud of them." A second round of applause began, weaker and uncertain. People clapped because they did not yet understand what was wrong and did not want to be the first person to stop. Aunt Rebecca looked down the table at me. Beside my mother, Vanessa slowly rose. The glass in her hand was already shaking. I did not raise my voice. I looked at my mother across the long table and said, "That is not true, Mom. Vanessa does not work for Bennett Blooms, and we already discussed this." The applause died. My mother's smile remained fixed while something behind it began working urgently. She opened her mouth, probably to turn the contradiction into a misunderstanding. She never had the chance. Vanessa set her glass down too hard and released a laugh that sounded torn in half. "Of course it isn't true," she said. Then she raised her voice. "Nothing about us is true." My mother said her name in warning, but Vanessa turned toward the relatives. "You want to applaud both girls? Do you want to hear about both girls? It was supposed to be me. Everything was supposed to be me. That was the agreement. That was how our family worked." She pointed toward the field. "You think Claire built this because our parents supported her? They canceled her 18th birthday because I cried. They kept her cake, changed the name on it, and served it at a party for me. I ate that cake." Tears streaked through her makeup. 22 years of carefully maintained fragility seemed to burn away in front of us. "And the money," she continued. "You should know about that too. They took $8,500 from Claire's savings, her wages, her paychecks. They spent it on my program in Columbus, and I quit after 11 days. I wasted all of it, the way I waste everything." My mother stood. "Vanessa, sweetheart, you are not well." Vanessa swung toward her, and her arm struck one of the zinc buckets at the head table. It tipped slowly. Water spread across the linen while 24 stems of Eleanor's crimson rolled onto the grass. Red flowers lay scattered in front of the entire family. Aunt Rebecca rose, her face drained of color. She looked at my mother and said, "You told us Claire left because of a birthday party." What followed was the deepest silence I have ever heard. Nora stood beside the coffee urn with her arms crossed. Vanessa covered her face and sobbed, suddenly looking smaller than I had ever seen her. My mother knelt in her navy dress and gathered the fallen dahlias one at a time because her hands needed a task while every version of the story she controlled collapsed around her. Then she looked up at me. Her voice was low, intended only for us, though everyone had become quiet enough to hear. "Fix this." Her eyes were wet but focused. "You can still fix it, Claire. Tell them the party was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you begin the farm. We are your parents. It is hardly even a lie. Give your sister the events position. That is all you have to do. Then this family goes back together. You can come home. Sunday dinners, your bedroom, your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart." I wish I could tell you the offer meant nothing to me. It did. Every part of me that had once been 7 years old wanted to accept it. My mother was finally placing the prize in front of me, an invitation to belong. But the price had not changed. I would have to reduce the truth, surrender part of the business, and disappear at my own table one more time. My family was offering to sell me a seat, using the same currency I had paid throughout childhood. I looked at the flowers in my mother's arms, and the relatives who were finally seeing what had happened. "You're right about one thing, Mom," I said. "I have always been fine on my own. You made certain I had enough practice." She tightened her arms around the stems. "But I am not buying my place back. Not with the truth, not with this farm, and not with myself. You and Dad are welcome at my table as guests. You can come any Sunday you want. That is the entire offer, and it will not be negotiated." My mother rose slowly. For 1 second, even after everything, I believed she might accept. Instead, she placed the dahlias on the table as though submitting evidence, took Vanessa by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She has never returned. The party did not exactly end. It released the breath it had been holding. Grandma Eleanor announced that this was the best birthday of her 80 years and warned everyone not to argue with her. That gave people permission to remain for another hour. Aunt Rebecca cut the cake with trembling hands and kept glancing at me like someone rereading a letter she had badly misunderstood. My father remained at the gate long after my mother's car disappeared. I later realized he had intentionally ridden to the party with Uncle Peter, giving himself another way home. When I brought him his jacket, he rotated his cap between his hands. "I should have spoken on your birthday," he said while looking at the gravel. "I have spent 20 years saying nothing. Turns out silence may be the loudest thing I ever did." I did not tell him it was okay. I had retired that sentence. "I know, Dad," I said. He nodded, climbed into Uncle Peter's truck, and returned to the house he had chosen every day of my childhood. He was not transformed by one honest sentence. Real people rarely are. But that November, letters began arriving once a month. His handwriting looked like wire, and most notes contained 4 lines. "Saw dahlias on a feed store calendar. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad." I kept every one. After the last car left, Nora and Tessa stacked the chairs while Grandma Eleanor guarded the remaining cake. I walked alone to the far end of the crimson row, as evening turned the field blue. One stem remained broken where the bucket had fallen. I picked it up and understood what I had still been waiting for. I had stopped paying the emotional rent 1 year earlier, but some part of me continued, hoping my parents would see what I built and finally want me back. That hope had now walked out of the field under its own power. From the tables, Grandma Eleanor called, "A cut flower is not a dead flower. Bring that stem inside and put it in water." The family fractured exactly as people around Hartwell still describe it. Aunt Rebecca came to the farm the following weekend with lemon bars and an apology written longhand so she would not ruin it by improvising. She read it aloud at the potting bench while both of us pretended Nora was not listening from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved to Grandma Eleanor's kitchen on Maple Street. The table usually included Grandma, Aunt Rebecca, Tessa half the time, and me arriving with my clothes smelling like eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody there asked me to become smaller. My mother attempted several new explanations. Vanessa had been overtired. I was going through a phase. Young women were emotional. But a story requires willing listeners, and hers were gradually changing seats. She still lives 2 miles away. We have not spoken since she left the field. I have accepted that we may never speak again, because reconciliation was offered only at a price I no longer pay. My father continues sending his short letters. At Christmas, he slips a $20 bill inside like contraband. He loves me from behind a fence he built himself. I no longer grade that love or pretend it is more than he can offer. It is what he has, and deciding whether to meet him there now belongs to me. Vanessa sent a text after midnight that winter. It contained 5 words. The flowers really were beautiful. There was no apology and no follow-up. When I saw her across the pharmacy in March, she lowered her eyes. I later heard that she moved to Columbus with a friend and found a job at a garden center, of all places. I never answered her message, but I did not delete it. Some seeds can remain in their packets until you know whether you want to plant them. The farm continued being a farm, which may be the quietest kind of miracle. The 3rd season's subscriptions sold out by April. In May, we planted 300 tubers of Eleanor's crimson. Every one descended from the shoebox Grandma carried into the seed room. In June, a 14-year-old named Avery began appearing at the greenhouse. She was all elbows, silence, and careful competence, the kind of girl who earns ribbons nobody drives across town to see. Her mother needed her to cause no trouble, and Avery was working hard to meet that expectation. I recognized her immediately. I pay Avery actual wages. I require her to hand me an invoice and state the amount aloud while looking at me. The first time she managed it without apologizing, I gave her a raise. Recently, I saw her standing in the greenhouse doorway with her hands on her hips, ordering a customer's child away from the seedling trays. She occupied the entire doorway without shrinking or asking permission. I had to step into the cooler for a moment and collect myself. That is the crop I am proudest of, not the wedding flowers, the subscriptions, or even the rows of crimson dahlias. It is one girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she is allowed to charge fairly for what she gives, ask to be seen, and occupy her share of the doorway. Anyone who loves you only when you are invisible is not behaving like family. They are acting like landlords who happen to keep your childhood photographs on their walls. Love that must be earned through disappearance is not love, it is rent. The day you stop paying is the day you discover who wanted you, and who merely benefited from your silence. That is my story. One canceled cake, 2 duffel bags, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 rented acres, and a signature bearing my own name. If you have always been the strong person at your family's table, I hope you build something that belongs to you and stand beside it where everyone can see. You were never difficult for wanting a turn. You were never selfish for protecting what you earned. And you do not have to disappear to deserve a place at the table.